So I'm going to start. First, I need to say thank you so much to the Stanley Chera family for sponsoring this day of learning with the SCA in honor of Mr. Stanley Chera, Zichrono Livracha. And I know that at 1 o'clock or 1:30, there was a former warrior who spoke, and people are maybe expecting stories of the same caliber. So just I ask you to lower your expectations. And I'd like to start off with a poem by Natan Alterman called The Silver Platter. Some of you may be familiar, some not. I'm going to share my screen so that you can all read along. So I'm going to read it in English, but you can read in Hebrew if you understand. And the land grows still, the red eye of the sky slowly dimming over smoking frontiers as the nation arises, torn at heart but breathing, to receive its miracle, the only miracle. As the ceremony draws near, it will rise, standing erect in the moonlight in terror and joy. When across from it will step out a youth and a lass and slowly march toward the nation. Dressed in battle gear, dirty, shoes heavy with grime, they ascend the path quietly. To change garb, to wipe their brow, they have not yet found time. Still bone weary from days and from nights in the field, full of endless fatigue and unrested, yet the dew of their youth is still seen on their head. Thus they stand at attention, giving no sign of life or death. Then a nation in tears and amazement will ask, "Who are you?" And they will answer quietly, "Anachnu magash hakesef she'alav lecha nitna medinat Yehudim." We are the silver platter on which the Jewish state was given. Then thus they will say and fall back in the shadows, and the rest will be told in the Chronicles of Israel. So it's a very heavy poem, and it's sentiments like this that stuck with me always, and I was always greatly inspired by. Not that I ever thought that my contribution of 18 months would constitute being a part of the silver platter, but it is things like this that helped me understand what a merit it is that we have the state of Israel, and that it's something that we have to continuously fight for. It's not a given. So I'm going to talk about why I decided to join the Army, what my training was like, what my service is like, and then I hope that we'll have time after for questions. So if anything comes up, or if you already have any questions in mind, you can just write them in the chat so that I can answer them as efficiently as possible. And I hope I'll get to them all. So I don't need to tell anyone here what a Zionist community we are all in. As a kid, I always felt that Israel was a part of my life, even though I was living in America. We would always visit, we would always talk about Israel. And I had the amazing opportunity of spending 3 summers in Israel, twice at a sleepaway camp with Israelis and Americans, and once on ILEAD, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So on ILEAD, we had a counselor who was an American who moved to Israel, joined the Army, and stayed there. And he was like the Zionistic propaganda spreader. So he said that Israel is not the emergency exit for when things get bad in wherever you are in the diaspora. It's where all the Jews should be during the good times and the bad times. And when he said that, I realized that my mindset had always been that Israel is an emergency exit. Life in America is so amazing. There's no reason for me to be living in Israel when I can be in America. And when he said that, I realized he's so right. We take Israel for granted. That's always going to be there whenever we need it. And we just, live our happy lives in America. So that stuck with me. But I mean, the thought faded away. I didn't give it much more thought after that. Later on the trip, we had an Army night. So that same counselor became a drill sergeant, and we spent the night on an Army base. He was giving us drills to run back and forth, push-ups, punishments. It was grueling and terrible. I hated every second of it. And I remember thinking to myself in push-up position, this is the worst thing I could ever imagine. I would never be able to join the Army. The thought had never crossed my mind before that, but in that moment I said, don't ever think about it. This is ridiculous. This is no way to live. And that was that. I didn't think of it after that. And when I got home from my trip, I was telling my mom stories, and I told her that one. And the punchline was, and then I thought to myself, I could never go to the Army. Conversation ended. I went to bed, and I thought to myself, if you're as staunch a Zionist as you like to think you are, then there must be a better reason for why you could never join the Army. That's such a strong statement. So there must be a better reason than that one night, 24 hours was a little hard. So I'm thinking to myself of reasons why joining the Army was implausible for me. And I couldn't really come up with any valid reasons. And the more I thought of reasons why it was unfeasible, I started coming up with reasons why it was actually maybe possibly something that I should consider. So I did that. I considered it. I started talking to people who I knew that were in the Army, especially my cousin Joe was in the Army at the time, and he was a huge help, both logistically in providing me with people to talk to and explaining to me how the process works, and mentally seeing someone so close to me there doing the thing made it seem much more realistic for me. So months went by, and I did research and I spoke to people, and I decided that it's what I wanted to do. I was going to join the Army. So in April of 2018, I drafted to the weapons instructing course. It was an 8-week course where you learn a few things. First of all, you learn discipline. You learn how to be a soldier, and you learn about weapons that they instruct on in the Israeli Army. So there are about 10 different types of weapons instructors, and they introduce you to each one more or less. And over the course of the 8 weeks, you learn about the weapons and also how to instruct, how to stand in front of a group of people, engage them, especially when that group of people is unruly 18-year-old soldiers. So at the end of those 8 weeks, your commanders who had been, looking at you and your strengths, your weaknesses, what you might be good at, they decide which weapon, which unit you would be most suited to. I got very lucky, and I got placed in the sniping unit. So in June of 2018, I started the sniping instructor's course. So that was a 10-week course where you learn how to be a sniper, because all sniping instructors need to be certified snipers, even if they're not going into combat, because you can't teach something if you're not, the best possible at it. So you become a certified sniper, and you also learn everything there is to know about the guns, about the ballistics, about the rules and regulations that the soldiers are subjected to in Gaza and the West Bank and wherever they're posted. And you learn, again, how to instruct, how to stand in front of people who may not be interested in what you have to say and force them to be interested, to listen, to absorb, because at the end of your time instructing them, they're going to go straight to the border and protect the country with the guns that you taught them how to use. So you're instilled with a great sense of responsibility over the course of the course. And at the end of it, you're placed with a group of soldiers, 20 or so soldiers who know nothing about shooting, know about shooting, but know nothing about shooting sniping rifles. And you have 5 weeks to turn them into snipers. So you have with you a couple of other instructors, and I always thought of my job as a glorified camp counselor. It sounds strange, but it really is what it was. You're with these kids, they're definitely kids, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. You need to make sure they're okay, they don't miss home. You gotta make sure they know what they're doing, that they're not gonna do anything stupid. And it's your responsibility that everything goes smoothly. So at the end of those 5 weeks, teaching, you're either in the shooting range with them or in the classroom with them. That's it. It's very intense. At the end of that time, you send them off, and in some cases, you literally send them straight to Gaza, where most soldiers are posted these days. I remember it was the end of my first course, and the soldiers were talking about how they're going straight to Gaza right after. They were going to have a weekend at home and then that Sunday go down. And I remember it was such a heavy moment because we realized we had another week to make sure these guys were absolutely 1000% beyond a shadow of a doubt ready to go do what you're teaching them to do. So that was great, teaching soldiers. I did it for a few months. I instructed on a couple of rounds of soldiers, and then I became a commander in the sniping instructors course. So the course that I underwent to become a sniping instructor, I became the instructor on it. So that meant that you get a group of kids who come, they know nothing about sniping, they know very little about being an instructor, and you turn them into a sniping instructor. That was the greatest experience that I had in the Army, being a commander and the connections that you make with your soldiers who rely on you because they're with you 24/7. They're not going home in the near future, and everything they need, both educationally, professionally, and emotionally, they have to turn to you. So I love that aspect of it, and I just loved the teaching and the satisfaction that it brought me. It was truly, truly amazing. One of the best experiences, aside from being a commander, that I had the amazing opportunity to participate in was the international sniping competition. So every year or so, my former base holds a sniping competition. So what that means is that hundreds of soldiers from, I don't even know how many different countries, come to Israel to participate in a sniping competition. You have soldiers from Rwanda to Chad to Kenya to Hungary, America, of course, Spain, you name it, Vietnam. They come and they participate in this sniping competition. So being that I was one of the few fluent English speakers in my unit, I was tasked with being their camp counselor, more literally this time. I had to make sure that they were okay in the hotel and that they had everything they needed, and that nothing went wrong in the competition. And I remember there was a moment I was sitting with the Germans and the Mexicans at dinner, and the Mexicans were saying how the Germans were so much younger than them. The Mexicans are all in their 50s and the Germans are in their late 20s, 30s. And they turned to me, I'm silent, and they asked me how old I am. I said, I'm 20. And their jaws all dropped to the floor because for the entire week I had been bossing them around, telling them when to be where, scolding them when need be. And now they find out I'm more than half their age. They were completely floored. And just, it was a testament to the Israeli army as a whole, because the rest of these armies, all the soldiers are in their 30s, 40s, maybe late 20s if they're early on. And they're now in a competition that's being run by 20-year-olds who have been in the army for a year, maybe two. So that was a very funny moment, and it was very sobering to me to realize that I'd taken it for granted that I was given the opportunity to serve in an army at such a young age, with no credentials whatsoever. And all these other snipers and the sniping instructors have been in the army for years. They're the most operational. They've had the most experience, and now here they are with these little pipsqueak. So that was a very funny experience. So now I'd like to turn it over to questions from you guys. So I'm going to open up the chat, and if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to type them in. Okay. What is your scariest moment of training or serving? Okay. Very scary moment. It wasn't for me, but it was for a soldier, one of my soldiers. So in my first course, I had a soldier who was an American from California. And we grew close because we both spoke English, and I helped him when he needed with the material because I was able to explain to him in English. And after the course, they went straight to Gaza, and we found out a little while later that a incendiary device had been placed on the border at night, and when they were moving posts, it exploded and it hit him in the neck. He was fine. He was in critical condition for a time, but he made it. He's okay now. But it was, I remember it was the first time someone that I knew so closely was injured and almost killed. And I remember how the entire country rallied behind him. The Ramatkal, who's the head of the army, visited him in the hospital. People came with food and just everything you can imagine, and just were so supportive of him, and anything he needed they tried to provide, because he was a lone soldier. He didn't have his family in the country. So seeing that someone so close to me was hurt so quickly after we'd sent him out, that was very scary for me. Okay. Why do you say you were lucky to be placed in the sniping unit? So like I said, there are 10 or so different types of weapons instructors, and sniping, in my opinion, is the most relevant and definitely the most enjoyable. The other units, they're so important, of course, but the other types of instructors teach on like missile launchers and regular assault rifles or tanks, things like that. And those things are extremely important, of course, just as important as sniping, but sniping is important not in a wartime. Like I said, the soldiers finish a course and are sometimes sent that weekend to Gaza. So sniping is one of the few fields that is important in peacetime, more important in peacetime than it is in wartime, because it keeps the peace. I'm not sure who's familiar with the situation in Gaza, but every week the Gazans protest and try to breach the fence between Gaza and Israel. So there are snipers lined across the entire fence, making sure that no one comes in. So that, I feel, being able to be a part of that that aspect of protecting Israel was very important to me. So I was very happy to be placed in that unit. How do you know Hebrew so well? So I went to Flatbush. Whoever has been in a Jewish school knows what your level of Hebrew is after you graduate. You can order from a restaurant, tell a cab where to go, but you can't really stand in front of a group of people and speak for 2 hours straight. So I was very nervous about applying to be an instructor, because I said, how can I, the whole job is teaching and is speaking, and I can't really do that so well. But it's a job that tons of Americans do. So I said, okay, it'll be fine. And you just learn, it's complete immersion. My first 2 months in the Army, I made the most embarrassing blunders and mistakes. And then another month later, I was able to speak for a couple of minutes without making a mistake. And it very, very, very painfully, slowly improves. And it's just all about having the confidence. And when you make a mistake, just continuing on and not let that ruin your whole lesson. But I made tons of mistakes. I was made fun of and laughed at every single day by my friends. But you just get through it. It was just something that you had to deal with. How did you know what unit you wanted to be in? So I spoke to a ton of Americans who had also joined the Army. They told me that the best job for girls is to be a weapons instructor. They said it's so fun, it's so cool, you should do it. So I did, and they were right. What drew me to going to the Army? I think it was really wanting to be a part of the continuing story of Israel. So I feel like I at least took the fact that we have a homeland for granted, and I wanted to not do that anymore. I said to myself that having Israel is not a given. It's not something that should be taken for granted, and I wanted to show my appreciation in the best way that I thought I could, and I thought that was doing the Army. Was training as grueling as you imagined it would be? So no, it wasn't actually. The training was for non-combat soldiers. It was for soldiers who were going to stand and teach. So there weren't a lot of drills running back and forth and push-ups like I had on I-Lead. I have to say that night on I-Lead was probably harder than almost anything I had to do in the actual Army. The difficulties of training were speaking for sure. When I had to stand in front of my peers and talk for 30 minutes straight, that was grueling because I just heard myself making all the mistakes, and you just had to continue and soldier on, literally. But honestly, not as grueling as I imagined it. Sorry to disappoint. Did I serve as a sniper in combat, and what is the standard issue sniper rifle? I was not a combat soldier. No, I was an instructor, non-combat. The closest I came to combat was going to the control room by Gaza and seeing the protest that was going on firsthand. That was a lot. That was very heavy to see, because you hear about Gaza in the news and you hear that your friends down there, but you never see it with your own eyes live as it's happening. You see people running towards the fence, throwing Molotov cocktails. It was seemed like it was straight out of a movie. But no, I was not combat. And the standard issue sniper rifle for counter-terror soldiers is the SR-25. And for regular combat foot soldiers, it's the M24, both with a .308 caliber bullet, 800-meter range for those guns. How did I go straight to being a commander? So I did a couple of courses for regular soldiers, and then it was after I think 4 months or something. It was pretty quick. They promoted me to be a commander. It was partly a lack of people in the unit, so slim pickings, and it was partly that the officer who would be the officer on the instructor's course, we had previously worked together, and he advocated for me because we worked so well together, and he thought that I would be a good addition. And once I did one, it was easy to be placed in the second one, and that was very lucky, I have to say. That was the best thing that happened to me in my service. Can you give an example of a story to explain what people mean when they say the people in your unit are really your brothers and sisters? Wow, okay. So that's definitely true. I think any situation where you're spending 24 hours a day with people, you grow to be a family. So off the top of my head, I remember when my birthday was coming up, and it's always sad when celebrations come up and you're not home to spend them with your friends and family. And my friend saw that I was upset about it, so without telling me, she rallied all my friends, and they planned this picnic on the beach on the weekend and dinner after. And it seems like a small thing, but a weekend for soldiers, it's 48 hours. And to get more than 5 people in the same place on a weekend is one of the hardest things in the world, because everyone needs to, in those 48 hours, see their family, all their friends, and do all the shopping that they need to do, and just rest. So the fact that they all, pushed their schedules aside and made sure that I was happy, that was very special. How are you able to keep in touch with family members and friends as well as you did with the very little time of phone service that you had? So my friends and family who I kept in touch with know that I would call in every 5-minute break that I had, whether it was walking to the lunchroom or, the soldiers had a 10-minute break. I would just call my friends, and whoever answered, we'd have just a quick 5-minute catch up. And I think that's definitely one of the things that I was able to be so happy throughout my service, because I was so in touch with all of my friends and family from home. Was there any easy part in your serving in the Army? Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the people that I was lucky enough to serve with. If I had been with people who weren't as pleasant as the people I was with, I definitely would not have enjoyed it as much as I did. And just by virtue of the fact of how, it's strange to say, but it's very enjoyable to become proficient in shooting guns. It's a very cool experience, being able to shoot hundreds of meters away and hit the target. So once you get a hang of it and you're good at something, it was definitely fun. I wouldn't say easy, but fun. Why does Israel train sniper instructors for so short a time? Very good question. So everything in the Israeli army is expedited. It's like express, because female soldiers are in the army for 2 years, male soldiers for 2 years, 8 months. That is an incredibly short amount of time, as opposed to all the other armies in the world where soldiers commit for years at a time usually, especially snipers. So it's just because they have so little time, so they only do what is completely necessary. You know, like I said, my basic training was 8 weeks. That is incredibly short relative to the months-long training that combat soldiers undergo, but they just teach you the not the bare minimum, but what is absolutely necessary for you to do your job. It's also very intense, in that it's hours long, like almost all hours of the day. If you're not sleeping, you're working. So yeah, that's it. It's just because they don't have more time. If they could train us for months long, I think they would, but they just don't have that luxury. Do you live in Israel now? I don't live in Israel now. I came back. For all my talk of being such a Zionist, I couldn't give up being home with my family. So I did my contribution and I'm back here. Do you have to serve in the reserves? I don't have to serve in the reserves because I'm an American living here. So they would have to pay for my flight. I think it's not worth it to them. What was the hardest physical part of the training process? I don't even think there is such a difficult physical part of the training process. Having to hold the gun up for so long, maybe that would be it. How did my parents react when I told them I'd be joining the IDF? Okay, so I hope I can do this in the last 3 minutes. At first, they didn't take me seriously. It was a very crazy claim at the time, I could admit. And then when they realized that I was serious, they just told me that no, I was not going to do that. I said, yes, I am, back and forth. I was in Israel for the time in seminary, my year in Israel. So it was a lot of very argumentative FaceTimes, and that's it. Are there any options for your 28-year-old son to serve in the IDF aside from Chera A? Not that I know of. I think once you reach a certain age, you're not able to join, but I could definitely do more research and ask people about it if you'd like. How was your adjustment back into the community and life at home? So it was definitely difficult. It was hard. I was welcomed back with open arms, for sure, but it was just such a culture shock, being back after doing something so different for 18 months. But it was nice. It was good. It's good to be back home with family. Okay, so I think that's it. I don't want to go over time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope everyone has a wonderful Yom Haasmaut. Have great barbecues, and that's it. Bye.